Hi, my name is Seraphine. 3 years ago, they told everyone I died. My daughter mourned me while I was still breathing. But when I came back unannounced, I found her, my 8-year-old, curled up on a piece of cardboard in a locked garage, whispering through tears, "My leg hurts." And her mother? She looked me dead in the eyes and sneered, like I was the villain for interrupting her performance. Why did no one ask where I'd been? Why did no one care where she was? What else did they bury with the version of me they chose to erase? It had been 3 years, but I still remembered every crack in the sidewalk of Sycamore Drive. The rows of picket fences were the same, perfectly trimmed like nothing had changed, but everything had. When I crossed the county line into Fort Collins that evening, I didn't tell a soul. No calls, no messages, just me, my car, and the ache in my chest I'd gotten too good at ignoring. They say time heals everything. I think time just teaches you to reorganize your pain until it stops screaming. But healing? No. That takes something else. I had no intention of passing by the house. God knows I'd deleted that address from every map and memory. But my hands turned the wheel on instinct. Or maybe grief was driving. The moment I saw that street sign, something tightened in my throat like I'd swallowed a decade whole. There it was. The house where my daughter's bedroom once had a glow-in-the-dark ceiling. Where her giggles used to echo down the hall while I read her bedtime stories, she made me repeat over and over again just to stay awake a little longer. The driveway was empty. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have kept driving. But there was light. A steady glow bleeding from the crack under the garage door. That house never kept the garage light on, not once. It was 10:03 p.m. I parked across the street, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel like they were the last thread holding my composure together. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, or maybe 20. My mind told me to keep it moving. This wasn't my home anymore. I had no right, no proof. But my body already knew something was wrong. I stepped out slowly. Every crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounded too loud in the cold air. As I crossed the street, I scanned for movement. The house was quiet. Too quiet. When I reached the edge of the driveway, I froze. That's when I heard it. Faint. Fragile. A whimper, just barely cutting through the silence. Then, "My leg hurts." It was her voice. I didn't think. I didn't knock. I gripped the handle of the garage and yanked it up. The metal groaned louder than it should have, and the cold fluorescent light above flickered once before staying steady. Zinnia. My daughter sat hunched over on a flattened cardboard box. Her hair was longer now. She clutched her leg with both hands, trembling, her face pale with confusion and fear. When her eyes met mine, they didn't widen with joy. They stared, hesitant, like she was afraid to believe I was real. "Zinnie?" My voice cracked. She blinked, her lips trembling. "I thought you died." I dropped to my knees beside her, careful not to scare her. "No, baby, no, I'm right here." She flinched as I reached for her arm. I pulled my hand back immediately. "What happened? Why are you out here?" "Who did this?" Before she could answer, a voice slithered in from the back door leading into the kitchen. A figure leaned against the doorframe, silhouetted in yellow light, holding a wine glass like this was any ordinary Tuesday. "She's being dramatic again," Eris said, lifting her glass. "You know how she gets, craves attention." She hadn't changed. Eris still looked like the woman who walked out of our mediation hearing like it was a photo shoot, flawless, composed, heartless. Except now, she was playing house with my child like I had never existed. I stood slowly, shielding Zinnia behind me. "She's not acting." Eris smiled with that tilt of the mouth she always used when she wanted you to feel crazy. "She threw a tantrum, said something nasty, so I told her to cool off out here. That's all. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I wanted to scream. Instead, I inhaled, slowly. "Where's your security footage?" She chuckled, turning her back. "Oh, please." "That old system? It's been busted for weeks." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The same one I hadn't had the heart to factory reset after the divorce. The same one still linked to the GarageCam app. I opened the app, logged in, waited. There it was, manual shutdown, 21 days ago. "That's not broken," I muttered, eyes still on the screen. "That's deliberate." Eris didn't turn around. She didn't have to. Back inside the garage, Zinnia clutched the fabric of my jacket like she was holding on to a dream. I sank next to her again. Am I overreacting? I whispered to myself. Am I really ready to go through all this again? The lawyer bills, the courtrooms, the gaslighting, the nights I had to remind myself I was still her mother, even if the world tried to say otherwise. Zinnia leaned into me and whispered, I missed you every night. And that was it. That was my permission, my green light. I stood up, looked Eris dead in the eye. I want her checked, tonight, or I make a call. Eris took a long sip, shrugged. You'll regret this. I turned back to my daughter, who had stood up now, shakily, still holding her leg. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. You're not spending another night in this house. Zinnia held my hand like it was the first safe thing she'd touched in years. Zinnia held my hand like it was the first safe thing she'd touched in years. I didn't speak as I guided her into the car. The door shut with a finality that felt like pulling the lid over a past I hadn't buried properly. As the garage door lowered behind us, I caught a glimpse of Eris standing in the kitchen window, wine glass lifted, a smirk pressed against the rim. That woman had turned motherhood into performance art. But this time, she'd forgotten her audience changed. Zinnia didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just stared ahead as if blinking too much might make me vanish. I glanced sideways at her as I pulled onto the road. Her grip on my sleeve hadn't loosened. I didn't ask anything right away. She needed silence, not interrogation. But in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't a child who'd been thrown off. This was a child who had been trained to stay invisible. I parked outside the only person I trusted to give me some truth, Cressida Harlow. She lived across the street from the house and had known me since Zinnia was still in pull-ups. I told Zinnia I'd just be a minute and left the engine running. Cressida opened the door with a soft gasp. Her eyes flicked behind me, looking for someone else. Seraphine, she whispered. My goodness, we thought... You thought what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her voice lowered, like she didn't want the walls to hear. We thought you passed. She said, you didn't make it out of that car crash. I stood frozen on her doorstep. They grieved me, I murmured later, once I got back into the car. While I was still breathing. That wasn't just betrayal, it was obliteration. There's something uniquely violent about being erased without a eulogy, having your child mourn a death no one had the decency to verify. That wasn't a lie. It was soul theft. At the motel I booked under a false name, Zinnia sat quietly on the edge of the bed. When I turned on the bathroom light to rinse my face, I heard the sharp intake of her breath behind me. She hadn't moved, but her posture had shifted, tense, coiled. What's wrong? I asked gently. She hesitated. Yellow light means, shut up. It hit me like a sucker punch to the ribs. That color, associated with warmth and kitchens and comfort in most houses, was now her mental cue to silence herself. Conditioned behavior. Controlled emotion. I took my phone out and typed a note. Yellow, equal suppression trigger. I wasn't going to forget that. Not again. Zinnia climbed under the motel blanket, her small form curled tightly, holding a worn bear I didn't recognize. I leaned over to tuck her in, smoothing the corners of the blanket, and noticed the stitching on the bear's paw, crooked, like it had been done by small hands. Something in me knew. I waited until she drifted off. Then, with careful fingers, I opened the seam. Inside, a tiny piece of paper, the edges soft from sweat and fear. On it, smeared words read, "Don't tell, or you'll be locked again." I held the note like it was radioactive. Children don't lie, I whispered to myself. They survive. And suddenly, I wasn't scared of the legal system, the money, the courtrooms, or even Eris. I was done playing polite. I was done being erased. I used a burner phone and dialed Eris. She answered on the third ring, voice like syrup. Well, that was fast. I know everything, I said flatly. She laughed. She's always been dramatic. Hides notes in cereal boxes, too. You know how kids are. Trauma's just pretend now, right? I didn't respond. I let the silence do the talking. When I hung up, my hands were steady, My heart wasn't pounding anymore. She was either delusional or dangerously practiced. Maybe both. Before dawn, I carried Zinnia, still asleep, to the car. I drove straight to an emergency clinic that didn't ask questions and didn't log things for insurance. Zinnia stirred when I pulled into the lot. "Where are we going?" she asked, eyes wide with fear. "To make sure you're okay," I said, "and no one's going to stop us." She hesitated. "Mommy says I'm not allowed to go without her." I stopped walking and crouched in front of her. "She's not the one keeping you safe anymore." "I am." The doctor was kind but careful. Zinnia flinched when he touched her arm, but she didn't pull away. After examining her leg and wrist, he looked at me with a grim face. "These injuries, they're not new," he said. "The healing fracture in the leg is at least 2 weeks old, and her wrist has signs of repeated strain." I nodded, jaw clenched. "They always said the worst place to be abused is home," I murmured after we left. "Because who would believe you, if not the ones who raised you?" It was late by the time we returned to the motel. I unlocked the door, ushered Zinnia inside, and started to close it behind me when something caught my eye. A car, parked across the lot, headlights off, engine still. I didn't wait. "We have to go inside," I said, locking the door behind us. Zinnia didn't ask why, and for the first time in years, neither did I. The motel door clicked shut behind us, but I had a feeling the past hadn't stayed out there. The motel door clicked shut behind us, but I had a feeling the past hadn't stayed out there. Zinnia walked ahead of me into the room, her steps small, deliberate. She didn't look around, didn't ask questions. She knew not to make noise, not because she feared punishment, but because silence had become her second language. I watched her for a moment before locking the door. The remote stayed untouched on the nightstand. The TV stayed off. She just sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap. Not because she was waiting for permission, but because no one had given her a reason to move unless told. "The worst prisons," I whispered to myself, "aren't built with bars. They're built with memory." That morning, I took her to a follow-up at a pediatric clinic in a strip mall. The receptionist smiled too brightly. The doctor spoke with clinical caution. After examining Zinnia's leg, he tapped the X-ray screen softly. "This isn't a fresh injury," he said. "The fracture's partially healed. Not well, but it started maybe 2-3 weeks ago, possibly longer." He looked at me like he was weighing words against consequence. I nodded, no questions needed. "I didn't cry in that room," I'd write later in my journal, "because she needed strength. But something inside me shattered in perfect silence." We stopped by a nearby gas station after the appointment. I let Zinnia pick a snack. She chose pretzels quietly, like even that was a risk. As we stood in line, I checked the time. It was 1:42 p.m., just enough time to make it to her old elementary school before the last bell. I didn't plan to confront anyone, just observe, gather. The school looked the same. Clean brick walls, cheerful posters, a rainbow-colored flag fluttering above the front doors, like this was a place that valued safety and care. Outside near the playground, I spotted a mother I vaguely remembered. Casey? Claire? Something with a C. She recognized me first. "You're Zinnia's mom, right?" she asked. "I am." Her eyes darted. "Is she back?" "She never left," I said calmly. "You saw her here recently?" "She was out a lot," she replied quickly. "The teacher said she had migraines." I looked at her, really looked. She had bruises. Her mouth opened, but she didn't reply. She knew, or at least suspected. That was enough. Back in the car, I called an old acquaintance who worked in school counseling and asked about a report that might have been filed for Zinnia last semester. She hesitated, then said, "It was noted. The counselor flagged it, but it never went further." Invisibility is never natural, it's arranged. And now I knew by whom. That evening, back at the motel, Zinnia knocked over a cup of juice by accident. It spilled across the laminate table like it was racing to escape. She froze. I moved to clean it without a word. When I finished wiping the last drop, I looked over at her. She hadn't blinked. "It's okay, sweet pea," I said softly. Her head tilted just slightly. "You're not mad?" That question stayed with me longer than it should have. No child should have to flinch at kindness. That's how you know the system failed. Zinnia curled up in bed early that night, hugging the same stuffed bear with the stitched paw. I stayed up, checking the motel locks again, then again. My phone was plugged in by the lamp, the screen casting soft glows against the walls. Sometime after midnight, I heard her scream. Not a loud one, just enough to slice through the quiet. "Don't lock me in!" I rushed over, pulled her into my arms. She clung to my shirt like it was a life raft. "It's just a dream," I murmured. "You're safe now, I promise." But the truth is, it wasn't just a dream. That scream came from a memory, one she hadn't chosen to revisit. This wasn't just abuse. This was training her to love her jailer. After she fell back asleep, I set up a temporary camera on the inside of the motel door. I'd bought it that afternoon from a small electronics shop and told the clerk it was for peace of mind. He hadn't asked anything more. Zinnia slept next to me that night. I moved her pillow close to mine and placed her bear between us. We shared the blanket like a secret, like protection. Before dawn, I sat at the small desk with the motel's paper notepad and my phone. I wrote an email to CPS, another to the Battered Women's Legal Advocacy Center. I uploaded the photos of her x-rays, the note from the bear, everything I could prove, time-stamped, labeled. If I'm going to win, I told myself, I'll win with truth and timestamps. At 3:21 a.m., my burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened the message. "You have no idea what you just started." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then whispered aloud to no one but myself. "You're right. I have no idea how far I'm willing to go. Some battles don't wait for daylight. Some battles don't wait for daylight." By 4:30 a.m., I was wide awake, lying on the edge of the motel bed with my eyes locked on the ceiling and my heart replaying the same 5 words over and over. "You have no idea what you just started." The text glowed on the burner phone, simple and calculated. Not a threat, not exactly, but something colder, a promise of what was coming. Zinnia stirred next to me under the blanket, letting out a soft sound that wasn't quite a whimper. I rolled onto my side and watched her sleep. Her thumb pressed gently to the ear of that same stitched-up bear. The line between her past and present was so thin I could see right through it. At 6, I got up and made breakfast with whatever I'd bought from the convenience store, instant oatmeal, banana slices, 2 paper cups of milk. She didn't say much, just watched me with a quiet that didn't belong to a child. As she reached into her backpack to grab a pencil, a crumpled paper fell out. I picked it up without thinking, smoothing it gently. It was a school worksheet, title in bold at the top, "My Family." There were stick figures, drawn carefully in crayon. A tall woman labeled Mommy, a man, Daddy, Avon, and a small girl with long brown hair named Me. My name wasn't there. What hit harder, though, was that something else had been erased. Faint outlines of another figure had been scribbled over in red marker, rushed and aggressive. I crouched down beside her. "Zinnie," I asked, soft but firm, "why did you change this?" She didn't look up. "I didn't," she whispered. "Mommy said I got it wrong. She said you weren't in our family anymore." There it was. "She rewrote me," I murmured later while sitting alone in the bathroom. With a pen, like I'd been a typo in Zinnia's life. That afternoon, I called my old attorney and asked her to email over all the files from the custody proceedings. I had them printed at a local copy shop and brought them back to the motel. I spread the pages across the motel bed like crime scene photos. Buried halfway down was a psychological report filed during the final hearing, signed by a licensed therapist, with my signature at the bottom, only it wasn't mine. The report said I suffered from chronic emotional instability and unresolved trauma indicative of impaired maternal judgment. The language was so perfectly tailored, it was chilling. "They didn't just take her from me," I said aloud. "They gaslit the courts to do it." I stared at the signature. It was shaky, slanted differently than mine. I'd spent 10 years in a business where every signature mattered. That one wasn't mine. I picked up the phone and dialed Eris from the burner line. She answered almost instantly. That didn't take long. Your lies have an expiration date, I said. She didn't flinch. You couldn't be a mother then, and you're not one now. Accept it. I hung up. No yelling, no slamming, just click. Some women drink wine to forget. Others drink it to sharpen their tongue. I was done explaining myself. That night, I recorded 3 voice memos, each one 5 minutes long, each one a segment of the truth, my version, the one no one ever asked for in court. Zinnia sat a few feet away, watching cartoons on low volume, glancing at me every now and then. She knew something was shifting, but didn't know what to ask. Every child knows when a storm is building in the house, I said to the recorder. I had to teach her that storms could be survived. The next morning, we went to a bookstore. First time in public together. I made her wear a hoodie and sunglasses, not because we were hiding, but because I didn't want anyone to mistake her for someone who still belonged to Eris. Are we hiding? She asked in the parking lot. No, I replied. We're preparing. Inside, I let her pick a journal. She chose one with a sunflower on the cover. This is for you to write what they never let you say, I told her. She nodded, clutched it to her chest like it was made of glass. That night, after dinner and a bath, I sat behind her brushing her hair while she scribbled into her new journal. She didn't say what she was writing, and I didn't ask. Halfway through a braid, there was a knock at the door. I froze. No one knocks at 9:47 p.m., without a reason. I told Zinnia to stay seated, then walked to the door and checked the peephole. No one. Cautiously, I opened it. A manila envelope lay on the floor. No label, no return address. I picked it up with shaking fingers and opened the flap. Inside, printed screenshots, security footage. My own garage, dated 3 years ago. Someone walking through the side door. No flashlight, no hurry. The timestamp was from the night I was in ICU, supposedly unconscious, but someone had entered my home. The timestamp was from the night I was in ICU, supposedly unconscious, but someone had entered my home. I sat at the edge of the motel bed with that envelope laid out in front of me like a surgical tray, every image a scalpel to something I'd tried to stitch shut years ago. It wasn't just identity theft, it was trespass into the one place I thought was sacred, my pain. The grainy black and white stills showed Eris walking through my garage door, unlocking it with the spare key I thought I'd lost in the accident. The clock in the corner flashed midnight. 2 nights after I was wheeled into intensive care with a collapsed lung and fractured ribs. In one shot, she held something in her hand, looked like a concealer stick. In the next, she faced the camera, tugged her blouse off one shoulder, and dragged her nails down her own arm. I remembered that image. She'd brought it to court, framed as evidence, told the judge I'd come to her house in a rage, grabbed her, said I'd relapsed. They said Zinnia witnessed it. I remembered sitting there, mouth shut on the advice of my lawyer, while she showed the court those scratches and dabbed the corner of her eye like a woman who had simply run out of tears. There's acting, and then there's rewriting the script to make yourself the victim. I took the envelope and slid it under the bed mattress. My phone was nearly dead, so I dressed quickly, slipped out while Zinnia was still asleep, and walked 3 blocks to the public library. The old copier hummed like a loyal dog when I fed the photos in. I scanned them all, labeling each by date, timestamp, and what they showed: garage entry, injury setup, courtroom evidence tie-in. I wasn't just collecting proof. I was building a story the court couldn't ignore this time. A courtroom may forget you, a timeline won't. Back at the motel, I recorded a 10-minute video. No tears, just clarity. I looked directly at the lens. This is why I disappeared. This is what they said I did. And this is what they did while I couldn't speak. I didn't post it, not yet, but I saved it to 3 cloud backups and emailed it to my attorney with the subject line, "If I don't make it." Then I wrote a blank email to Eris. No subject, no text, just attachments, screenshots of her setting up the injuries. I hit send and waited. 9 minutes later, the motel phone rang. "Didn't take you long," she said, voice calm like a lullaby. "You want war? Fine. Let's see who bleeds first." I leaned against the table and replied, "I already bled." You just weren't watching." The line went dead. I didn't go to sleep that night. I spent it pulling up every document I could access. Zinnia's old school records, medical statements, court files. I called CPS and left a formal request for a wellness check on her educational history and prior counselor reports. Then I scheduled a meeting with the pro bono legal advocate I'd found through the Battered Women's Network. She'd taken one look at the screenshots and said, "If half of this checks out, we're not just filing, we're exposing." Later that morning, Zinnia came out of the bathroom in her pajamas, clutching her toothbrush. "Are we not staying here anymore?" she asked. I smiled at her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Some fights require more than shelter, baby. They need strategy." We spent the afternoon packing a small duffel. I didn't want her to feel rushed or afraid, so I framed it as a new adventure. She picked out her 2 favorite books and the stuffed bear with the note still inside. I left that part untouched. Let her decide when to talk about it. That evening, I sat beside her on the bed and read her a children's book she used to love, about a fox and a moon and a quiet forest. Midway through, she asked, "Do stories ever lie?" I set the book down. "Only when someone's afraid of the truth," I said. She nodded slowly, then reached up and kissed my cheek. I made a silent promise, an oath between mother and daughter. She'll never question again who protected her. I'll make sure of that. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed again. Blocked number. I played the message on speaker. "You think you're helping her. You're not." It was a man's voice. Zinnia looked up from her pillow, her body going rigid. She turned to me and whispered, "That's the voice that told me to stop crying." She turned to me and whispered, "That's the voice that told me to stop crying." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My hand hovered over the voicemail icon, torn between preserving the proof and erasing the sound of his voice from her ears forever. Some voices don't belong in a child's memory, yet they lodge there like glass in the skin, silent, sharp, and impossible to forget. The next morning, Zinnia sat cross-legged on the bed while I packed up the last of our things from the motel. As I zipped the duffel, she reached under her pillow and pulled out another stuffed animal, smaller than the bear, but with the same odd stitching on the paw. Her eyes didn't meet mine when she offered it. "I think there's another note," she said. My heart thudded. Gently, I loosened the thread, careful not to tear the fabric. Inside was a strip of paper, edges worn, the pencil smeared from fingers too small to hold fear steady. "Don't scream. Don't run. Or you'll lose Mommy too." My throat burned, not just from rage, but realization. They taught her to fear silence and then punished her for making noise. We drove into Denver for a scheduled consult with a pediatric trauma specialist. The clinic was bright and sterile, a space that tried too hard to feel safe. Zinnia clung to my arm while we checked in, her body tense even as I whispered reassurances. Inside the exam room, the doctor, Dr. Harris, tall, calm, not easily rattled, read through the preliminary records. He rolled the portable X-ray scanner into position and asked Zinnia to extend her wrist. The screen flickered, then filled with images, microfractures, multiple, layered. "These didn't come from one incident," he said softly. "This looks like chronic strain, wrist twisting, jerking, perhaps from being yanked repeatedly." Zinnia looked down, embarrassed, as if the injuries were her fault. Dr. Harris turned to me. "Is this part of an open custody case?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He hesitated. "Then someone needs to speak for her." That evening, I sent a message to a friend I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, Darla, who still worked as an aide at Zinnia's old school. She agreed to meet at a diner near the highway. Over lukewarm coffee and fries we didn't touch, Darla lowered her voice. "She once turned in a drawing," she said, "of herself, crying behind a door. The counselor flagged it. We were supposed to report it. But Eris came in that same week, said it was about your absence, said Zinnia was just confused." "And that was enough for you?" I asked, sharper than intended. "No," Darla said quietly. "But nobody wanted a headline, not after last year's press. They chose comfort over curiosity. And my daughter paid the price." That night, back in our new short-term rental, a tiny studio over a bakery, I opened my laptop. The burner phone connected via hotspot. I started a post on a private forum for domestic violence survivors, uploading everything: voice recordings, scans of the notes, x-ray stills, screenshots from the garage. I didn't include names. Not yet. But I signed it. A mother they said was dead. A daughter they said was dramatic. By morning, it had spread. Dozens of messages poured in, some supportive, some cynical, and one that caught my eye. I believe you, and I know what they covered. I'm in Larimer County. I can help. They always counted on me being emotional. They forgot I was strategic, too. By noon, I had finished compiling our first legal packet. It included a full timeline, affidavits from doctors and school contacts, medical records, psychological red flags. I emailed it to CPS and the Family Court of Larimer County. The subject line read, "Evidence you missed on purpose." As the sun went down, Zinnia sat across from me, coloring in her sunflower journal. She looked up between strokes. Why did they want me quiet all the time? I put my hand over hers. Because the truth scares people who've lived too long in lies. Later that night, when the bakery below us had closed and silence returned, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. Again. Text. If you think a few bruises will win this, you don't know what we buried. I didn't panic. I got up, walked outside barefoot onto the gravel lot behind the building. And there, under the driver's side of the car, was Zinnia's necklace. Smashed flat, chain snapped. A tiny pinhole lens glinted under the crushed glass bead. It wasn't a gift. It had been watching her. I stopped asking what they were capable of. I started asking how many more times they'd already done it. I stopped asking what they were capable of. I started asking how many more times they'd already done it. By the time morning light spilled through the blinds, I was already sitting at the table, laptop open, burner phone beside me, Zinnia's crushed necklace resting on a paper towel, like it might still whisper something if I stared long enough. That wasn't fear. That was a message. A signature. I took a breath and opened the voicemail again, this time with purpose. I used an online audio recognition tool, uploaded the message, and cross-referenced it against public court documents and flagged CPS complaints. It took less than 10 minutes. There he was, Avon Carrington, same cadence, same baritone edge masked as charm. The file was from a 2017 case in Arapahoe County. A different child, different mother, same voice, same pattern, no charges filed. The mother recanted, the report read. How convenient. He's done this before, I said out loud. And someone let him keep doing it. I forwarded the clip and report to my legal rep, attaching the new footage of the necklace camera. Within the hour, she wrote back, "This isn't just domestic abuse. This is a pattern of judicial neglect." While Zinnia was brushing her teeth, my phone buzzed again. It was Cressida. "I found something you should see," she said. "It's from 3 years ago, around the time CPS did that inspection." An image popped up moments later. Eris, standing in the front yard with a child. Smiling, holding hands. Except the child wasn't Zinnia. My stomach dropped. The date stamp? Same day CPS came for their home visit. They rehearsed that lie, I whispered. Together. They'd borrowed a child, substituted her like a prop, fed the inspectors whatever narrative they needed, wrapped in clean clothes and a forced smile. When protection becomes performance, justice becomes a ghost. I didn't hesitate. I sent the image and audio analysis to the journalist I'd been speaking with, a woman named Lila who had a reputation for exposing systemic failure in family court. Her reply came 20 minutes later. "I'm digging. You're not alone in this. There's more here. I can feel it." Later that evening, while Zinnia and I played a quiet board game on the floor, she looked up at me and asked, "Are we safe now?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her the worst was behind us, but that would have been another lie. "No," I said gently. "But they're not either." My lawyer warned me the next day. "They may try to counterfile. Say you kidnapped her. Spin the story." I already knew. That's why I spent the rest of that morning organizing my press file. Copies of documents, dates, witness names, Screenshots. Timestamps. I wasn't just telling a story. I was weaponizing the truth. After dinner, Zinnia curled into my lap on the couch, thumb pressed to her cheek, eyes searching mine. "Why didn't you come sooner?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Because they convinced the world I didn't want you." She didn't respond, but her fingers curled tighter around mine. Later that night, I received a blocked call. I answered, hit record, and stayed silent. Eris's voice came through, sweet and cold as a knife. "You were always just a part-time mother. Now you're an obsessed one." I let a beat pass before replying. "And you? You turned motherhood into theater and cast a predator as co-lead." Then I hung up. An hour later, I checked my email before bed. There was one new message. Subject line, "The drawing she gave me." No text. Just an attachment. I downloaded it, heart already pounding. It was a crayon drawing. Zinnia, behind bars, red scribbles above her head like fire. And words written in shaky block letters across the top, "Please let me out." At the bottom, small but clear, a line written with purpose, "To the real mom." It was dated 6 months before I came back. And signed, "To the real mom." I stared at the drawing on my laptop screen, unable to breathe for a moment. The lines were crude but clear. Zinnia behind black bars, red scribbles swirling above her head like smoke or fire. And those 5 words at the top, written in a child's shaky hand, "Please let me out." She'd tried to reach me before I even knew I was missing. They just didn't let her message arrive. I saved the image, printed it 3 times, and tucked one copy into the file I'd be bringing to the cafe later that day. My lawyer, Marla, had arranged a meeting with Eris. "Public space, midday, no confrontation," she'd said. But some confrontations are long overdue. We sat at an outside table. Marla flanked me. Eris arrived 20 minutes late, sunglasses on, phone in one hand, like she was walking into a casual lunch. She barely glanced at Zinnia's drawing as I placed it in front of her, next to a stack of printed emails. She tilted her head. "You really think showing me crayon art is going to shift custody?" I looked her dead in the face. "No, I think it'll remind you that she's not your puppet." She leaned back and smiled, slow and smug. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I do," I said. "I'm making space for her voice, something you've silenced long enough." Marla remained silent but alert, hands folded, eyes tracking everything like a hawk. Eris didn't say another word. She stood, left the drawing behind, and didn't touch her latte. The next day, my legal team unearthed an old external drive during evidence review. It had been buried under a pile of inactive CPS files from a former caseworker who'd gone on early retirement. We didn't expect anything useful until we played the files. One video clip, 17 seconds. Dated 2 years ago. Zinnia was in her old bedroom. Avon yanked her by the wrist, dragging her out as she stumbled and cried. Eris stood nearby, arms crossed, saying nothing. It wasn't blurry, it wasn't vague. It was violence caught blinking. I watched it once. Then I emailed it directly to my CPS advocate, to Marla, and to 2 local officers I'd met through our case review. No dramatic captions, just, this is what they called parenting. That afternoon, we filed an emergency injunction to freeze Eris and Avon's custody rights until a full hearing could be scheduled. Marla sat across from me at her office, files piled high, jaw set. "They'll strike back," she warned. "Be ready." I nodded, already ahead of her. I'd made copies of everything, hidden backups in cloud accounts, on flash drives, even printed packets tucked into glove compartments and coat pockets. Zinnia and I returned to the apartment just before dusk. She helped carry groceries inside, clutching the box of cereal like it was the most fragile thing in the world. When we settled in, she looked at me, hesitant. "Do I get to tell the judge?" Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. I crouched in front of her and took her hands. "Yes, honey. This time you do." Later that night, Lila, the journalist, called. She'd just published her article. A Mother Erased, One Child's Story of Silence and Survival. It spread faster than either of us expected. By midnight, there were hundreds of comments. Women, fathers, former foster kids. One read, "This could have been me or my daughter. Thank you for saying what others swallowed." I read that one out loud to Zinnia. She blinked slowly and whispered, "We're not the only ones." The next morning, we walked into CPS headquarters with Marla. I carried the evidence file. She carried a courtroom demeanor so sharp it made the receptionist sit up straighter. Their attorney, gray suit, gray soul, tried to minimize the recordings. "These things can be taken out of context," he said. "You're not hearing me," I interrupted. "I said she bled." "And you called it ink." The silence that followed was the loudest moment of the day. By the time we left, the judge had scheduled an emergency hearing. 48 hours. We went home, we rested, we breathed. But peace doesn't always last. At 7:16 p.m., my phone lit up again. Unknown number, no voicemail, just a text. "You forgot. I still have something that belongs to you." I dropped the phone, raced to the bedroom. Zinnia's bed was empty. The window was open. The curtains moved like breath, but the room was empty. The window was open. The curtains moved like breath, but the room was empty. My body ran before my mind caught up. I tore through the motel room, calling her name in a voice I didn't recognize. Zinnia's name ripped out of my throat in broken whispers, never loud enough, never sharp enough to cut through what was already gone. I checked under the bed, the bathroom, the hallway. Nothing. The door was still locked from the inside, but the window was a silent confession. I yanked my phone off the charger and pulled up the motel's surveillance app. The last clip was time-stamped 3:42 a.m., just static. The feed had been unplugged, disabled without a trace. Again, I sprinted to the front desk. The night clerk looked up from his phone with wide, dumb eyes. "Did you see a little girl leave this room? Room 106? He blinked. No, I didn't. Wait, you mean right now? 3 hours ago." He shook his head, useless. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. They moved slow, measured, asked if there was a custody arrangement in place. "She's missing," I snapped, "and someone has her." One officer, must have been fresh out of training, asked me again if I was the biological mother. My voice cracked from holding it in. They still think I'm the unstable one, I thought, because I don't look like a villain. They asked me to start collecting any personal belongings Zinnia had touched. Something about scent dogs, or maybe just busy work to keep me from screaming in their faces. I grabbed her toothbrush. The bear. The sunflower journal. I opened the small trash can beside the nightstand to toss a water bottle, and froze. There, folded and wrinkled beneath a paper napkin, was a letter. Lined notebook paper, torn from a spiral. Zinnia's handwriting still clumsy in lowercase. "Please let me go to a new school. I don't like what happens when I come home." I pressed it flat, smoothed it with my hand like it was a wound I could heal with fingers alone. I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. I folded it carefully, put it in the file folder, and stepped out of the way while they dusted the window frame for prints. Back in the car, I remembered her iPad. I'd stashed it in the glove compartment during one of our moves between shelters. She hadn't touched it in weeks. I powered it on. The screen was smudged with tiny fingerprints. There was one video, unmarked, dated 2 days before I found her. I hit play. Zinnia sat cross-legged on a motel bed. Not ours. Her hair was down, her voice small. "I wasn't supposed to tell, but if you're watching this, maybe you're my real mom again." She looked into the camera. "He says if I talk, she'll go away. That's what he says. But I didn't mean to get her in trouble. I just wanted to be with her." She gave names, dates, words I didn't want her to know. I brought the iPad and the letter straight to CPS and the nearest precinct. They hesitated. "We'll need to process this within the existing framework," one officer said. "There are steps we have to—" "She won't survive your process," I snapped. "She needs protection, not protocol." My attorney, who'd just arrived, took over. "Emergency review today." While we waited in her office, a delivery man arrived. Plain brown envelope, no return address. Inside, a printed report, heavy stock paper, It was Zinnia's file, a therapist's evaluation. Patient shows signs of psychological compartmentalization, likely due to prolonged gaslighting. This wasn't just my child. This was every child who got lost in someone else's version of events. That night, my phone buzzed again. No caller ID, a new email. Subject line, check the shed on Cottonwood Drive. No police. My fingers trembled, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, my flashlight, my coat. The streets blurred as I drove. My hands stayed at 10 and 2, white-knuckled. When I parked across from that old property, my breath fogged the windshield. I stepped out slowly. The gravel crunched under my boots. I crossed the yard, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The shed door creaked open, and inside, there was a sound too familiar to forget. The shed door creaked open, and inside, there was a sound too familiar to forget. A soft, broken humming, out of tune, out of rhythm, like someone mimicking what calm was supposed to sound like. My flashlight swept over paint cans, an old rake, stacked chairs, until it landed on her, Zinnia. She sat on a rolled-up sleeping bag, knees tucked to her chest, eyes wide but dry. She didn't cry. She didn't even move, because whatever they taught her, panic wasn't allowed. I dropped the flashlight and rushed to her. "Zinnie, baby, it's me." She blinked once, then slowly uncrossed her arms, but didn't speak. I pulled her into my arms, feeling how cold her skin was, how still her body had become just to survive. There was a blanket nearby. I wrapped it around her, then caught a glint of something tucked between the shelves. A spiral notebook. Inside were drawings. So many. One showed a house with no windows, just her and a dark figure labeled The Quiet Man. Another, a garden, full of color, sunshine, and a woman drawn small, far away, labeled in block letters, Real Mom. She'd drawn her own map of safety, and I wasn't even on the same page. I carried her to the car, turned the heater on full blast, and drove straight to the county sheriff's office, not city police. They were already compromised. Inside, I uploaded everything, the voicemail, the GPS data from the camera necklace, the shed coordinates, her drawings, her therapist's buried report, her voice memo, her iPad video, all of it. My lawyer, Marla, arrived 30 minutes later. One look at my face and she said, "This ends today." I met her gaze and replied, "It ended the moment I pulled her out of that garage." By court order, the emergency hearing was granted within 48 hours. When we entered that courtroom, I walked like a mother, not a victim, not a suspect, but a witness to what they'd tried to bury. Under oath, I testified, played Zinnia's iPad confession, handed over the printed screenshots from the shed, showed them the therapist report, the one CPS never logged into evidence. CPS finally stepped forward, offered formal support for full removal of Eris and Avon's custody. The judge, a man who looked at me like I'd once been another file, cleared his throat and said, "Miss Locke, we owe you an apology and a future." Outside the courtroom, Marla handed me my phone. A new message. I opened it and stared at the screen. Avon again. "You forgot. I still have something that belongs to you." Back at the motel, I pushed the door open and stood frozen. On the bed, a small black bag. Inside, shredded photos, me and Zinnia, her first birthday, the zoo trip, her asleep on my chest at 2 years old. At the bottom, a USB, label, The Truth, in red marker. Marla took it from my hand. "Don't plug that in. Let us handle it through court." That night, Lila's second article dropped. The Shed and the System, How a Mother Brought It All Down. Within hours, it caught fire online. Shares, comments, outrage, support. I sat next to Zinnia as she scrolled. We read a comment together from a woman in Texas. "I wish my mom had fought like that for me." Zinnia leaned into me and whispered, "You did." 2 days later, the official court subpoena arrived. Eris and Avon were to be tried on charges of child endangerment, evidence tampering, and obstruction. That should have felt like the finish line. But when my phone rang that night and I listened to the distorted voicemail, I knew we weren't done. The voice was barely human, glitched, robotic. "She was never supposed to make it back to you." But she did. And now, I'm never letting go. But she did. And now, I'm never letting go. I watched Zinnia sleep, her small frame curled beneath a quilt we'd picked out together. No more motel blankets, no more second-hand silence. This was the court-appointed apartment CPS placed us in while we waited for final orders. It was bland, white walls, 2 rooms, old carpet, but it was ours. And in that space, for the first time in years, my daughter didn't flinch in her sleep. It wasn't silence this time, it was stillness. Peace has a sound too. It's just harder to recognize when you've never known it. The morning of the hearing came fast. Zinnia wore a simple blue dress with a sunflower clip in her hair. She asked to bring her journal. I nodded. Inside the courthouse, the room felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe because this time I wasn't the one on trial. The judge called Zinnia to a separate room. She looked at me first, uncertain. I held her gaze. "You don't have to be perfect," I whispered. "Just be honest." They let her speak privately, with a child advocate beside her. I wasn't allowed in, but I didn't need to be. She returned 15 minutes later, pale but standing tall. Back in the main courtroom, the judge cleared his throat. She stated, and I quote, "I was scared to talk before because they said I'd lose her, but I never stopped waiting." I didn't cry, not in front of them, but my hands trembled against the wooden bench. She didn't just testify, I thought. She healed in public. The judge looked over the final files, then at me. "Miss Locke, full and permanent custody is granted effective immediately. Visitation rights to Miss Monroe and Mr. Carrington are hereby terminated." Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit like warmth for the first time in a long time. Later that afternoon, I went back to the garage, not to relive it, to close it. The keys had been returned to me. I stood inside the hollow space where so many lies had been stored and stared at the corner where I first saw Zinnia clutching her leg. Her old toy train sat forgotten beneath the shelving unit, dusty and silent. I picked it up, then placed a note on the workbench for Eris. Simple, final. "You didn't lose her. You gave her away the day you chose control over compassion." CPS released a public statement later that week, admitting fault, failure, oversight. Avon was officially charged with 3 counts of child endangerment. His past records finally surfaced. 2 other silent files, now very much awake. Eris avoided federal time with a plea deal, but she forfeited all rights to Zinnia. She wouldn't be near a family courtroom again without a badge and shackles. Justice wasn't loud. It was a door quietly closing behind them. And when that door shut, others opened. I received a letter from a woman in Oklahoma. Typed, not handwritten. "Your story gave me the courage to leave." I read it out loud to my daughter. Zinnia started journaling nightly. Not just drawings, words, small sentences about her day, things that made her feel safe, bright things. I watched her write, and I thought, the world didn't owe us a do-over, but it gave us a second sunrise. Eventually, we moved to a neighborhood near Denver. Quiet, simple, with a garden out back and a school with a teacher who smiled like she meant it. Zinnia picked yellow for her new room. I hesitated, but she insisted. Because it doesn't mean be quiet anymore. It means light. We painted together, yellow walls, white trim. She laughed when she spilled paint on the floor. I didn't scold her, just laughed too. We adopted a dog, small, clumsy, loud. Zinnia named him Echo. "Because I used to be afraid of sound," she said. "Now I chase it." One evening, I placed one of her drawings on the fridge, 2 figures holding hands under a golden sun. She walked up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and said, "You don't have to be perfect anymore, Mom." I turned around and pulled her close. "Neither do you." But there was still one place I hadn't gone back to, and one truth I hadn't faced. There was still one place I hadn't gone back to, and one truth I hadn't faced. But first, today. Today was sentencing day. The courthouse in Fort Collins hadn't changed much in 3 years. Same echo in the lobby, same faint smell of burnt coffee from the vending machine no one refilled. But this time, I wasn't standing there alone. Zinnia walked beside me, her small fingers wrapped around the soft ear of her stuffed dog, Echo. The courtroom was packed, people I didn't know, journalists, advocates, survivors. I could feel the air tighten when the judge entered. First, Avon Carrington. Mr. Carrington, for repeated endangerment of a minor and failure to comply with court orders, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal custody with no chance of parole until year 9. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone, just stared ahead like he'd already disappeared. Then Eris Monroe. For obstruction of justice, psychological manipulation of a minor, and falsifying state documents, the judge said, you are hereby stripped of all parental rights. Your name will be publicly recorded, and you will not be allowed contact with any child under 18 without supervised review for the next 10 years. Eris turned toward me. Her lips twitched like she wanted to say something, maybe explain, maybe excuse. But I didn't meet her eyes. I turned to Zinnia instead, brushed a hand across her hair. You don't fight for a stare down. You fight for the one who never had a voice. When it came time for my victim impact statement, I stood up slowly, not to deliver a speech, but to make something plain. I'm not here to relive pain. I'm here to remind this court of something it almost forgot, I said. You took her name off the mailbox, but she still knew who she was. And now the world knows it too. For the first time, no one said a word. Outside the courthouse, the press circled fast. I gave them exactly 1 minute. This isn't just my story, I said into the cameras. This is every mother who was told they were too emotional to protect their own. This is every child whose silence was staged by adults wearing good intentions. The footage went viral by evening. Lila's third article dropped that same night. How a Shed Unlocked the Truth, the Reckoning of a Broken System. My words were quoted in parenting forums, survivor circles, even in a congressional hearing on child protection reform. Zinnia's new school enrolled her under her real last name, Locke. No middle aliases, no confusing forms, just one clear identity. She liked her new teacher. She loved that the classroom had a reading nook. And every day when she came home, she'd tell me one small, good thing about her day. I got to write in yellow today, she beamed one Friday. On purpose. I started volunteering at a nonprofit for mothers navigating custody battles. Weekends, I'd sit with women holding folders full of documentation, fear, and half-believed truths. And Zinnia? She planted flowers in the small garden we'd started. Each morning, Echo barked like a fire alarm for happiness, loud, clumsy, adored. She took the drawing from our fridge, the one with 2 figures holding hands, and framed it on her nightstand. We weren't just survivors, I told her once. We became architects of a better home. One day, I drove alone to the garage, the one that held too many ghosts. I brought a hammer and no anger, just closure. I dismantled the door, one wooden panel at a time, no smashing, just purpose. When I finished, I took a piece of red chalk from my pocket and wrote across the wall, Zinnia lives here no more. Sometimes justice isn't about erasing the past, it's about outliving it, louder. Weeks later, Zinnia and I sat by a quiet lake. We shared sandwiches and watched ducks skid across the water. She leaned against me. Do I have to tell this story when I'm older? She asked. Only if you want to, I said. But if you do, tell it like you owned every ending. She smiled. Because your name is not a secret anymore, and neither is mine.